Hello, I'm Robin. Welcome to Bookspin. Today I'd like to talk about Remnant Population by Elizabeth Moon. This was published in 1996, and it was the first time for me to read this author, whom I've not heard much about, and this book was a random pick from the Book Spinner. So I didn't really know what to expect for this one, but I'm pleased to say I did really enjoy it. It's a remarkably engaging first contact story with an intriguing alien race and a distinctly compelling protagonist. So we have a narrative that takes place on a distant planet, which has been partially colonized and terraformed by humans. We've got a very small human outpost of settlers on this planet, and they've been living there for about 40 years or so. And they're pretty much a self-sufficient colony. They've got all the crops and the animals and the technology that they need to survive. But they're not totally independent. They are sponsored by some powerful corporation, which we don't really know much about. But right at the start of the story, the company tells them they're abandoning this colony. It's not really explained why, but the settlers are told, it's time to leave, pack your bags, we're going to put you in cryo sleep and send you off to a new world. So, of course, people aren't very happy about this, but they have no choice but to accept it and comply with the evacuation order. So that's the kind of backdrop to the main story. And it's in this context that we get introduced to the main character, whose name is Ophelia. And she is a very interesting character. She's a widow. She's quite elderly. I think it says she's in her 70s, if I remember correctly. And she's been living in this colony right since it started. So I think her character, that in itself is quite refreshing. It's not very often you see an older female protagonist in a science fiction narrative. And she doesn't really have like a typical protagonist's background, if you like. She had a very modest upbringing without any formal education. She's worked very hard and she's suffered a lot throughout her life, and she's actually quite a marginalized member of society. She doesn't get a lot of respect from the community. Even her own son and daughter-in-law, who are the only surviving members of her family, basically see her as a bit of a burden and not useful for anything, which is totally not fair because she is actually a very active and productive person in the community. She does lots of cooking and gardening and embroidery and all kinds of domestic work. But she doesn't get respect for that. She just gets taken for granted. So right from the start, you can see that ageism is kind of a recurring theme that we see throughout this novel. But Ophelia is not just a meek and submissive old woman. She's actually quite a headstrong and independent-minded person. She's worked hard her whole life, and she's kind of become tired of human society and the lack of respect that she receives. So she actually sees this evacuation as an opportunity for a fresh start and a new freedom, not by going along with the evacuation and, setting off to a new world, but by staying behind by herself. So she decides to hide out and wait until everyone's left, so she can live out her remaining life in the village all by herself, with no one to bother her. It sounds a bit crazy, but she's actually a very capable person. She can easily look after herself by herself, and for her it's a very liberating experience. So this is how the story starts off. But then it turns out she's not actually as alone as she thought. There's another intelligent race that exists on this world. Now, I won't go into any detail here, but they're basically a native bipedal species, previously unknown to humans, who at first glance appear pretty primitive and lacking in technology, but they are in fact extremely intelligent beings with a refined culture and a remarkable capacity for fast learning. So Ophelia comes into contact with these beings, and as much as she'd rather be left alone, she has no choice but to learn how to deal with them, how to interact with them, how to understand them, because they're not going anywhere, and they're going to be a big part of her life. So eventually she builds a close bond with these aliens, and they come to trust her, and she achieves a level of respect from them far greater than anything she ever had from human society. And at the same time, her level of responsibility increases as she becomes a sort of unofficial ambassador with this race. And she has to consider what are going to be the wider implications if and when news of this species reaches the outside world. So a lot of thought has gone into this alien race, and I think the author has created quite a compelling vision of a race of beings that is at first inscrutable, but gradually becomes easier to understand as we get more hints at their biology and their social structure and their civilization. And in a number of ways, they kind of conform to the noble savage trope, but they are extremely intelligent, quite sympathetic, and given the right resources and a push in the right direction, they clearly have the potential to rapidly develop and create a high technology civilization very quickly. So there's a lot of interesting potential there, and the narrative that follows is quite straightforward, but it's very engaging. It's very satisfying to read. And I think a lot of this has to do with the character of Ophelia, who is a very interesting case. She rejects the role society has allocated for her as a frail old woman, and she remains confident and resourceful and resilient throughout the story in all of the different situations she's put in, both as a recluse and also as her newfound position of responsibility among the aliens. And throughout her life, and in many conversations that she has in this book with her fellow humans, people look down on her, or they assume that she's not useful because of her age, and also because of her lack of education or qualifications. So ageism, sexism, and classism are all explored through this lens of a sympathetic character and the contrast of the status and respect that she receives from the native alien species versus her fellow humans. It adds a kind of social critique to this thought-provoking first contact tale. And I think it works really well. The result is an immersive and humane story with strong characterization and captivating themes. I honestly can't really say much to fault this novel. It's not the most complex sci-fi story out there, but it is very well written. And I think it's probably one of the strongest first contact novels that I've ever read. So I give Remnant Population 4.5 stars. So that's it. Thank you for watching. If this is something you've read, or if you've read anything else by Elizabeth Moon, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you again soon.